What drives a scientist to explore inner dimensions of human life? 21st century has witnessed series of discussions between modern science and spirituality. There are different versions included in these series of discussions. Modern science has made human lives much easier and compatible, but will it be able to act as an antidote of human sufferings? In the meantime, I have spoken with Dr. Sandra Magnus, a former US-based NASA astronaut and Buddhist meditation practitioner, to speak about different issues of human life. I have spoken with her about science, spirituality, and way of life. In the meantime, I would like to quote a passage from my teacher, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, from his book, Joy of Living. By the way, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche is the one Tibetan master who is trying to culminate between, trying to amalgamate modern science and Buddhism in the wider spectrum. So his definition of emptiness, which you said a little bit about this, I would like to quote how he defines emptiness. Because the nature of our mind is emptiness, you possess the capacity to experience a potentially unlimited variety of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Even misunderstandings of emptiness are simply phenomena arising out of emptiness. The last line. Even misunderstandings of emptiness are simply phenomena arising out of emptiness.
Yeah, I think we all have perceptions in our minds that are based on our experiences. I know my perceptions have changed over the years based on my experiences and how knowledge has changed from intellectual-based to experience-based. I know that if I tell you that I visited a modern art museum, and on the wall was a canvas, a big red square, and that was considered a piece of art. Every person in this room will have a different idea in their head of what a big red square is like. Some of you have small squares, some of you have big squares, some of you have dark red, some of you have bright red, and so that's your version of a red square. Right? Is any one of those correct or incorrect? Or none of those correct, right? So the emptiness part is maybe none of them are correct, and because we're all perceiving them differently, it's not really an actual thing. I mean, as a scientist, I don't know if I can really describe it with any kind of scientific theory. I think it goes back to we're all sort of our own little universes, and that we have our own perceptions and our own ideas about what different words and concepts mean, and so what's right and what's wrong. So when you communicate with people who are working internationally, one of the things that I always watch for is the context of the conversation and how they're using words and what's their cultural context, because even in English, we run into communication problems, so when we work across cultures, you have to be very aware of that as well. So I'm pretty sure I didn't answer your question, but that's the only thing I've got for you. But because the idea of emptiness from a scientific viewpoint is really hard to describe based on my understanding of science, and I'm not by any means one of the top scientists in the world, so someone a lot smarter than me might have a better answer on that.
For the inquisitive brains, we will have question and answer sessions after our conversation, so your any kind of feedback, queries are highly accepted.
I would like to comment, out in space it's a vacuum, right? There's no air, there's nothing out there, and the idea of a place from a science viewpoint, idea of a vacuum, the fact that there's nothing in there is, we understand it, but yet at the same time it seems kind of weird, right? Because sound can't travel through a vacuum. And electromagnetic waves can. So there's, I mean, that's one of those things I think we understand intellectually, but we don't understand internally, experientially. Just like gravity, we understand gravity intellectually. I'm the only person in this room that understands gravity experientially. And so there's a lot of things that we do as scientists where we understand it intellectually, but we haven't necessarily had the experience at the same level to change that type of knowledge, and I think that makes a big difference.
As you have said before that you're taught so many things in your life before you went to your exploration. And you knew lots of things. But did you have a feeling of knowing yourself, who you are, before you went to space exploration? And my next question is, does the knowledge we acquire from outside world, from the teachers, from the books, make sense if you compare your experiential based knowledge? So how do you see your own experience as a wisdom or as a transcendental knowledge?
Well, certainly we are all growing every day as human beings, and I think I was having a conversation with my niece, for example. She's 13. It's difficult being a 13-year-old girl, I don't care where you are in the world. And she was telling me, she was trying to figure out who she was. And I told her, I said, Margie, I didn't have any kind of clue who I was as a human being until I was 31. Right? Because there are so many things that we learn as we grow. And hopefully I'm going to continue to do that. But one of the things that was interesting about my career as an astronaut is I had such a wide variety of unusual experiences and unusual things that people were training me on, that I really had an opportunity to grow in a very rapid and broad way because of the breadth of the experiences I've had. And I learned a lot about myself during the course of that training, and of course getting on orbit and having some of that intellectual knowledge change to experiential knowledge changed my perceptions about a lot of things as well. So I would say that I had a decent idea about who I was when I joined the Corps, but I grew a lot more during the astronaut corps, and even leaving the astronaut corps, I took a job running an organization. I had never done that before. And while I used a lot of the lessons that I had learned in my astronaut career there, I also learned some more things about myself as well. So hopefully we're, as human beings, we're in this constant stage of learning and growing, but I feel like by the time I was in my 40s, I had a pretty good, solid idea of my basics. And one of the things that, as I got older, that I really, and again, goes back to reading some Buddhist philosophy, was really understanding about releasing negative emotions and not letting them control you, not letting other people drive your behavior. Because, as a female in a male-dominated field, sometimes you run into men who don't quite understand that it's okay to be a female in a male-dominated world, and they act in inappropriate ways, and you can't respond to that. You have to let those kinds of things go, because they're basically putting on a lot of negative energy, and if you get caught up in it, you're letting them trap you in their pool. And so learning things like that, you learn those by experience, and it's hard to let some of that stuff go. But once you do, it's the best advice I give to young women, is you can't let other people define who you are. You cannot do that. You have to decide who you want to be. And even in the pressures of being an astronaut, there are events that come up, and people are trying to force you into a box because they have expectations, and it's really important to figure out who you want to be and strive to be that person. And I think those are lessons that I've learned along the way, and hopefully I'll still continue to learn. I would hate to think that I would be static. You don't want to be static as a human being. You want to grow, and you want to develop.
We have got two lamas who hail from Tibetan Buddhism, so maybe they will have some feedback or comment on this. I'd like to quote again from Carl Sagan again, cosmologist. and it has this quote has nothing to do with our conversation Sunday. So we'll switch to the next question. In its encounter with nature, science invariably elucidates a sense of reverence and awe. The very act of understanding is a celebration of joining, merging, even even if on a very modest scale, with the magnificence of cosmos. Oh, I think I'm repeating this. Okay, so I think I'm repeating this. So I would like to quote Albert Einstein here. So would you mind? Okay. The religion, the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend personal God and avoid dogma and theology. Covering both the natural and the spiritual, it should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things natural and spiritual as a meaningful unity. Buddhism answers this description. If there is any religion that could cope with modern scientific needs, it would be Buddhism. So this is what Albert Einstein has said. Let me again quote Albert Einstein. He says, "A human being is a part of a whole, called by the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness." I'd like to go back to your journey in space. You have to maintain maximum level of awareness during your time span there in space. In meditation, if I'm not wrong, essence of meditation is being aware. The way we are having conversation here, the way we move outside, and everything we do, if we are doing with our awareness, it becomes meaningful. So how is your feeling that you being aware inside the space, and you're trying to be aware of your feeling, sensation, and emotion while practicing meditation? So how do you synchronize, or how do you try to balance that level of awareness?
So, can you hear me back okay? Yeah. So basically, what Vikesh is referring to is a comment I made to him earlier. And I lived in space for 4.5 months on the space station. And one of the philosophies I had about that experience was it's necessary, I believe, to be a good crew member and a successful crew member in space, it's necessary to be aware, very self-aware. Because when you think about what's happening with the space mission, scientists have been working on their experiments for 5 or 10 years, designing, theorizing, building the equipment, and finally it's in space. The equipment that we're working on in the space station was built by engineers for a decade, finally launched. So there are thousands of people on the ground who have an investment in the equipment and the activities and the mission objectives that we're trying to do. And the whole community on the ground is there to support us and make sure that we have everything we need so we can do that mission for them. So they're counting on us very, very strongly to do that mission well. And so that means that when we're in space, we're in a fishbowl. There are cameras on us all the time. There are people watching our every move. They're trying to second guess what we're doing. If I ask a question, like for example, I gave Vikesh the example earlier today. If I say to Houston, "Hey, what's the weather like there tomorrow?" They'll have 17 meetings to go find out how to answer the question because they care that much about supporting us. And so that means that if I wake up crabby one day, which sometimes we do that as human beings, wake up and we don't feel so good, I had to be self-aware enough to know that I was feeling crabby, number one, and then number two, that I couldn't let it affect my behavior during the day. Because if I'm crabby to the ground, it's amplified about 100 times.
And it makes everybody's day on the ground very unpleasant. So those, you know, any kind of negativity is just immediately amplified, and it negatively affects the performance of the team, and it negatively affects the people who are caring so much about helping you try and get your job done. And so it was very necessary, I thought, to be a good crew member is to maintain a strong self-awareness, understand what's driving your emotions, and then not react, not just simply react. So that's the form of awareness that Vikesh is responding to, is having that moment-by-moment thinking process about what's going on and not blindly reacting. And it really is required, especially, again, when you're working across cultures. Because sometimes, you know, for example, when I was working in Russia, they didn't have a cultural norm of shaking the hands of women, right? And so as a female in a male-dominated field, it would be very easy for me to take offense at that, because I could view it as a sign of disrespect. But that's not how it was intended, right? So I couldn't react emotionally in the context of my own culture. And so this was self-awareness is something that you know, we could practice developing during training, but I went into my space station mission knowing this was going to be very important, because negativity would just be hugely amplified and very destructive, and I really needed to understand when something was upsetting me, how I needed to release that, and in what appropriate fashion. By the way, we had a treadmill on orbit, so my stress relief, again, was running when I was on orbit, and so that it's really kind of an extreme mindfulness, right? Because you have to kind of be aware, kind of watch yourself from inside as you're going about your day and making sure you're not just reacting. And that, I think, is what Vikesh is referring to with this question. So, and I developed that philosophy slowly as I was going through training, as I was working across so many cultures, you know, trying to, as a community, you know, make the space station work. Because it is 16 different countries, there's different languages, there's English in the metric system, there's different political systems, there's different ways of doing engineering, there's different ways of operating, but it worked because we were all committed to the goal. And we had the patience to have the same conversation 17 times until we felt like everybody understood each other, right? And so there was a whole community of people that were practicing this, and I learned that philosophy going through that process and translated into, this is how you have to behave on orbit as well.
Okay, so I'm still skeptical and really inquisitive to know how you used to make communication with your family members from the space down here. So that would be next fun, I guess.
So a lot of people think while we're on the space station that we're very disconnected from friends and family, but we're actually, in this age of advanced communications, we're actually not. I could make phone calls through a satellite to my friends and family. And by the way, it was always fun, especially, my family got used to it, of course, but I would call my friends occasionally, and they would pick up the phone, and I would say, space calling, and they got such a kick out of that. And to me, of course, it goes back to, here's an interesting one about perception. To them, this was a big deal, right? Someone was calling them from space, and they always were, oh my gosh, this is so great. And to me, I was just in my normal life making a normal phone call. So to me, it was no big deal, right? So completely different perceptions about the same experience right there. We also could do video conferences with our family on the weekends, on Sundays. And so when we did those, I usually made sure I was doing, you know, fun zero-gravity astronaut trips, so they could get a little bit of an impression about what my life was like. But again, it's not the same as being there. And then we had email. And so we were constantly having the opportunity to send email up and down. So the communication was actually ongoing and very common. And it goes back to, by the way, that building the trust and making sure you have a good relationship with Mission Control, because people would be emailing you things that maybe Mission Control had heard about or not heard about. And so it would be really easy to get into a communication snarl and have some misunderstandings happen because of the way that things were necessarily coming up to the space station via email and things like that. Again, so it was very important to not react emotionally to things that you were hearing, because someone could send you an email and you'd immediately think, well, why isn't Mission Control telling me that? Right? And be upset about it. So again, you had to think about all of this communication that was going on. But we're very connected while we're on the space station. There's a lot of communication going on.
Zero gravity is
very, I mean, maybe like very important for us, for me especially, highly realized, or let's say, very serious practitioners in Tibet used to levitate, maintaining their zero gravity. I'm still unaware how they used to do, but I think that the practitioners levitating and being in the zero gravity, and astronauts being in zero gravity in the space has got some sort of connection. So, are you aware about any Tibetan practitioners, lamas, levitating, leaving the space, and flying in the sky?
No, I'm not. I'm not familiar with that. My experience with gravity, and just to be clear, when we're in space and we're going around the Earth, we're actually in free fall. So what we are is that we are going around the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. I apologize for not using metric because I can never remember the metric. And so as we're going around the Earth, we're falling to Earth, and the Earth is moving out from underneath us at the same rate. So we're in a constant free fall. So we're still in the gravitational field, but we do not feel the effects of gravity because we're in free fall. If you've ever been in an elevator and the elevator goes down really fast and you kind of feel a little minute of lift, or if you've ever been on a roller coaster and you've gone over the top of the roller coaster and you feel that kind of moment where you leave your seat, that's the same thing. That's an instant of free fall, but we're in it constantly. So the fact that we're floating has to do with we're in that moment forever, you know, that little moment you feel at the top of the roller coaster. So we're still under the influence of gravity, we're just negating it by the way we're moving. And so, as a scientist, well, let me go back up a minute. I made a comment earlier that I understand gravity in a way that you don't. And it's true. Because I've been outside of the force of gravity in this free fall moment and living there. And I think when you talk about the difference between intellectual knowledge and experiential knowledge, that was the biggest perception shift. Well, one of the two biggest perception shifts that I had as an astronaut was my understanding of gravity. Because I wasn't worried about re-entering Earth's atmosphere and coming back to gravity because I'd lived here my whole life. And it was fascinating to me, and you adapt really quickly to zero gravity or to free fall. I'm just going to continue to use the term zero gravity. You adapt really quickly, and I'll get back to your question in just a minute. You adapt very quickly to zero gravity, and it feels very normal to live in that environment. And so as we started coming in and re-entering on my first mission, we're strapped in our seat, and I was holding my procedures, my checklist of what we have to do, and all of a sudden I noticed I had to start using my arm muscles to hold my book, and it was weird. And all of a sudden I noticed that I had this external force pushing on my body, forcing me into the seat, and it was horrible. And it's hard to explain how strange it was for me that this external force from out of nowhere was all of a sudden acting on my body. And I looked at, we had a little meter on the space shuttle that told us how many G's that we're experiencing, and it was only 1/3 of Earth's gravity. So we were just starting to slow down and re-enter the gravitational field and lose the effect of free fall. And so when you leave the planet and you're looking down on it, what you see, and I mentioned this yesterday at the school with the children, is what you see is one organism. In science terms, you see what's called a closed system. In a closed system, everything is connected, and every action has a reaction, and the system operates as an entity. The Earth is a closed system. The Earth is one organism. It's so obvious from space that everything is connected. Astronauts talk about this a lot, and the fact that you look out the window, you don't see the boundaries of countries. You don't see 7 billion people, you see a planet. And again, going back to science terms, it's a spaceship. And we're all crew members on the spaceship. And so any action that we do has a reaction in the system. Now, it might be small or it might be large, and it's hard to measure. But anybody who thinks differently is kidding themselves because it's one system. And that's a perception that's extremely obvious the minute you leave the planet and that you look at it. So I'm actually, just as a side note, there are companies in the US who are creating spaceships to launch tourists for a brief 5-minute exposure to space. And these are people who these are celebrities, these are people who have a voice in the media. And I'm very interested to find out what happens when they go up and they experience the same thing that I'm talking about, because they will, and they come back and talk about it. And what does that do to the greater, cultures around the world? So we're at the beginning of an interesting journey as a human species, as more of this kind of perception shift happens with more and more people, as more people access space. Because it's very obvious. It's one system and everything is related. And so to your question, outer to inner, right? So looking at that, it's like, wow, it immediately changes the context of how you think about the planet if you start thinking about it as one system and you see it's obviously all connected. So I think it'll be a really powerful human development as more and more people get this experience, because it does make you reflect on the nature of how we're treating each other, treating the planet. I think the space station is a good example of what we can do as human beings when we really put our minds to it and we have the will to achieve something, because that program, again, had so many things against it with the different countries, different agendas, things like that. But it succeeded because we were committed. And so as more and more people, I think, understand that the planet is a system, perhaps the commitment and the will to work together to solve some of the other problems will arise after that. But I think the experience, that intellectual knowledge to experiential knowledge, that shift will be very important first. Because sometimes it's hard to act on just intellectual knowledge. Sometimes you need to experience something or feel it to learn the lesson. And that's a lesson that sticks with you much, much greater. So I'm hopeful for the future because of this trend of trying to get more and more people into space just so they can get that view. I think it's worthwhile. So perhaps this conversation can take place with more and more people as time goes by. In 5-10 years, not tomorrow, but it'll take some time. But it will translate into how people think in their inner selves as well. I really believe that.
I think we are almost to an end. My last question to you will be, these days, many monks are found in the laboratories in the name of their their status of their mind or their calmness. How calm they are can be proven when their brains are taken to the labs. There are many universities in the West. More than 17 universities are trying to figure out how meditation can change the level of thoughts, feelings, and compassionate attitude to other beings, to all sentient beings, creatures. How do you feel about monks being the part of the lab and trying to prove that meditation can change the lives of many people in this earth?
Yeah, I know it's something the Dalai Lama has been very interested in the intersection between neuroscience and meditation, and how meditation can affect even the structure of the brain. I think having those kinds of conversations is really important. It's bridging, again, it's going back to, there's two different ways of looking at things with different vocabularies, and as you talk together and find those common areas of understanding, that only enriches all of us. So having an open mind and introducing these different viewpoints is, I think it's good. And personally, I can't speak from, I'm not a neuroscientist clearly, but I always feel better when I have happy thoughts versus when I'm stressful. And when you have a lot of negative emotions and stress running through your body, your brain's racing. you can't sleep, you can't stop thinking, there's things firing off all the time, but when you're happy and you're calm and you're joyful, your brain is quiet. And you can just sit there and watch the world go by in peace. I mean, to me, that's sort of obvious, but I'm not a neuroscience. So the fact that they're studying all of that, I think, is really important.
Last question to you. Is that okay? Okay. So my last question will be: His Holiness Dalai Lama and a group of scientists are trying to come up with a syllabus to teach kids, young kids, how important it is to have ethical education or moral-based, value-based education to teach kids, so that one day those kids will become very compassionate astronaut or scientist like you.
Well, I think it's important to have a strong syllabus, but even more important, you have to have people who are giving examples to the children on how to live. Because you can create whatever curriculum that you want to, but if they're not led by example, they won't absorb the intellectual knowledge. They're going to absorb the experiences that they have and use that. So if the curriculum has to be supplemented, or I would say the curriculum is a supplement to the examples that they see. And that's really the hard part, right? Because you have to train the adults to provide the examples so that the kids can see the examples. And there's a lot of not exactly perfect examples out and about in the world around us today. And so having strong examples locally is very important. And if you can design a curriculum that it helps illustrate the power of those examples to the children, so that it helps amplify the lesson, I think that's probably a good thing. But having a curriculum without the ready examples is only half the battle, I think. But it's a good place to start.
Many thanks for all the respected people for being here today, accepting our invitations. With a big thanks to Dr. Sandra and Bikash for such insightful conversation. Now I would like to conclude this event for today.